Everybody, and welcome to the Rob Harris Podcast. This is a monumental moment here for us today, and I am so very excited to get us starting here today. As I said, this podcast right here has been a long time coming. Everybody who's been waiting for this, people who've been dear to me, I've been saying that I was going to open this thing for years, and hey, Mama, we made it. Look at where we are. Look at where we are today. This podcast right here is intended to help people along the way. I've always said that I am someone who thinks is going to make it someday. Whatever that is, the podcast is here to help us figure out what that is and help us get to a place of happiness and joy. So what we're going to do here during our time together, week in and week out, is try to get to a place of contentment, a place of happiness, and we're going to build a community on here. And I am so excited to be your captain, your guide, your facilitator, and your brother here on this journey. So like I said, I'm going to give you guys a couple of things here today. We're going to keep this one super brief, but again, I'm just so happy to be here. I'm sure you can see it written all over my face. I finally got my setup. You guys can see the mic here. I got my fancy little webcam. I'm sure you can feel it coming out of the screen, man. I've been wanting to do this for so long, and it's been probably, I want to say 5 or 6, actually maybe 7 years ago, this idea was brought to me saying like, hey Rob, you should really get out there. You should really do a podcast. This is something you should really do. Your voice means so much to so many people. You're so articulate, you people lavishing me with praise, and here I am today. Actually, the person who brought it up for me, we're not in great communication anymore, but this was something that he really thought could be transformational because he just took in all the conversations we had over the year. He used to talk to me about how much it meant to him to have somebody side by side with him on this journey. And he used to always say, someone else needs to hear this message. And he used to always tell me this. And I now echo the same thing when I'm speaking to other people is, you're keeping it in for yourself, but you never know who out there needs to hear the message that you're keeping in. What I'm trying to do here today, starting today, I want to say 13 episodes already planned out, mapped out, ready to go, trying to bring as many people as much value as possible. And like I said, I felt like I'd always be here. I felt like I'd always be doing this. And now to be sitting here, speaking to you all, recording it as a video, releasing it as a podcast, doing all the legwork, and really getting into the nuts and bolts of this thing, it's such an incredible feeling. And those of you who are listening to this, those of you who end up watching this, I'm just so grateful for you taking the time to sit with me and listen to this podcast and this video on YouTube. So as we get started, like I said, this thing, we're going to build a community here. We're going to get after it with one another. We're going to start putting bricks. We're going to build a foundation with one another. We're going to build this house together step by step. I'm going to let you guys know everything that's going on in my life that I can disclose. I'm going to let you guys know everywhere that I'm planning to move. And as I move, I'm hoping to hear your stories. I'm hoping to get questions from you guys. I'm hoping that this thing eventually becomes yours, and I'm just kind of the figurehead. And as I'm doing so, I'm hoping that I'm bringing value to the community. And the way I look at it is, I grew up a Christian man and boy into a man, and I just believe that there is an inroads that can be created between religion and secular culture, because we are here to be spiritual beings, and I believe representatives for the Most High. But I do believe that we are here for a purpose. So what are we doing? How can we look at it, and how can we bridge the gap between the spiritual and the secular world and do it effectively, being here in the natural world, which we are? So just to get that out of the way, this podcast is going to be based off of both religious perspectives. We're going to have some religious perspectives. We're going to have some spiritual perspectives. We're going to have some perspectives that have to do with corporations. We're going to have things to do, I say the word secular, but I'm more talking about the corporate world. We'll talk to people who are spiritual leaders. We'll talk to people who are corporate leaders. We'll talk to people who have done a really good job of integrating both of those things. This is an application podcast. This is an application video where we can work together to find some of the things and find some of the sources that have made multiple people successful in life, and we will continue to build together to find that idea of happiness together. And that word happiness, I like to think of as contentment, a place of rest, a place of promise, a place of solitude with self and your community. And so when I think of happiness, I'm not thinking of it as a place of joy or an emotion or a feeling. It's a state of mind. It's a state of being. And as we try to, because we are all working jobs, whether it be in working a job or running your own business or running a nonprofit or running a church, we all have things to do in this life, or farming, or whatever your vocation is. We all are here and we are all doing something. So everyone who comes on this podcast, everyone who listens, hopefully we're bringing value to every single person, because I know there's so many people from different walks of life, and I'm hoping to touch and grab as many people as we can. We're not segregating anybody out or moving anybody out. We're just opening our arms up with love so we can all figure out, what is happiness? What does that mean for us? How can we reach this state of contentment in our workplace, in our home, with our children? Now that I've given you an idea of what we're trying to do here, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. So like I said, this is the Rob Harris Podcast. As you know now, my name is Rob Harris. I am in my early to mid 30s, 34 years old. So dealing with, those early 30 problems. I'm starting to realize the things that I think are a big deal. A lot of other people are going through similar things. So it's been an interesting time in my life, and we'll go over all of that. So like I said, I grew up in a spiritual home. My parents were in the military, so I grew up in a strict and a spiritual home. Growing up in my house, it was a very tense environment. And I've always had this energy to me that it was always tough to sit still. I always wanted to be the center of attention. As I got older, that need kind of died out. But as a kid, I was always playing. I always wanted to be out. I was one of those kids who wanted to be out until the street lights came on. And if I did all my chores, I was able to do that. But like I said, I grew up in a military home, a very religious home. So like I said, everything you did was for a purpose. Even if it was getting chores done, it was to go play with friends. So like I said, there was a lot of structure in my life, and I ran away from structure for a while, which we will get into, but I had a lot of structure in my life, and I start to realize now as an older man that structure does pay off. So as a kid, I had a brother, I had a sister, I had my two parents. So there's three of us, three children, two parents. My parents worked a lot. So we spent a lot of time playing sports in the YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs. We spent a lot of time with nannies or babysitters, or however you want to consider that, waiting for my parents to get off. So I spent a lot of time in multiple groups and doing multiple things. I was always active as a kid, always doing something, and always excited to do something. I really thought I was going to play in the NBA. That was my dream as a child, but as I got older, that kind of faded. So why am I telling you my background? Because this is where it starts to get interesting. So when I moved around a lot because we were a military family. When we finally got settled in, I was in a new place with new faces. I had finally been out of school from first grade to sixth grade. My parents moved us, had a really tough time with the move. And because it was such a new environment, the move was really tough on myself, my sister, but mainly me, because I had formulated such a good group of friends. My sister was in the lower grades, so she was at home with the nannies and the babysitters for a while. So where I was in school for all 6 of those years, for the first 2 or 3 years, my sister was at home. So I had my core group of friends. They all ended up going one way, and I ended up going another way. As I look back on it, it was the best thing for my life, because where I had grown up, the neighborhood was not the greatest, and where we were able to move to, because my parents started to work their way up in their careers, we had better resources, better opportunities. But as a young man, you don't know that. I also grew up in an area where I was really one of the only black kids in that area. So I grew up in a tough time. It was a tough time for me because it was such a transition going from being with multiple people who look like you, and even if they were a little bit lighter than you. It was still a whole different ball game moving into this new area. Again, the success my parents were having in the workplace with investments and things of that nature. I had a really tough time blending in. And when you're in your junior high to high school years, you're really finding yourself. And I found myself finding myself through the eyes of other people, trying to be what I thought other people would like for me to be so that I could be liked. And so that was a really tough time for me, because I went from being me and the person I thought I was to trying to be someone else. And so that was my first lesson, and the first time I had ever dealt with different races and being picked on. I went from being the guy to the guy, but in not such a great way. So being picked on for, I was a bigger kid, and I also was a darker kid. It was not always the most fun through my junior high and high school career. I found a lot of success in athletics, and because of that, I found more acceptance, and I became that kid that everybody liked. I could hang out with the color guard people, I could hang out with athletes, I could hang out with baseball team, basketball team, track team. It didn't matter. I became that fun-loving guy, and that was kind of the first time I realized that I had a very great way of communicating. I also, at a young age, was speaking in churches to adults about the good news, about the gospel, from a very young age. And so I knew that I had an ability to communicate and empathize at a very young age. Those were some of the things that I felt really helped me get through some tough times. I just was excellent at a couple things. The empathizing and the communicating and the writing always helped me. Even when I was in the toughest times, I could find friends, or I could find shoulder to lean on, or I could feel better through making someone else feel better. There was a lot of things that helped me because I was such an effective communicator. I was such an effective leader. I was such an effective writer. Things like that. I look at it now and I realize they were my gifts, and now you see me doing this now. However, back in the day, it wasn't like the coolest thing, because I wasn't the best athlete I thought I was. Wasn't the best athlete. I was a good athlete. However, looking back on it, I had some speech and debates that I was very good at. I was always the vocal person on our team. I was always the ear for people to speak to. And now, as an adult, you're seeing that the gifts that God had given me, they were already starting to come to fruition then. So getting out of my high school years, like I said, being in the home that I was in, it was very structured, very disciplined. I kind of fell off the rails. And some of those times that I fell off the rails and the things that I've been through, we will document. I actually have a podcast scheduled to talk about some of the things that I did to get out of some of the habits that I was in and some of the coping mechanisms that I had. And so we will go through that journey as well together. So anybody who struggled with things, I'm going to put myself out there, and I hope that we can build together and we can speak about it together and we can kind of move on from it together. I've been through therapy. I go to therapy. I've been doing that for a while. But the people that don't, maybe just need somebody to talk to. So like I said, that'll be a conversation down the road. Like I said, I have that as a podcast, but I'm going to briefly talk about it today. So had some things coming out of high school when I was finally exposed to having a good time without mom and dad around. It became something that I was just going to experience, and I had a good time. I had a way with words. As I said, I found that to be something that allowed me to be successful with friendships. I became a DJ. I was a party promoter. There was so many things I ended up doing that, again, that communication thing, pops right back up. One thing I do want to talk about in my college career that kind of changed my life, or did change my life, was when I was at ASU for a bit. I had a communication class, and I remember sitting in that class and remembering this thing is going to change my life, and it did. So I went to ASU right off the bat, and then I went to junior college, and junior college was the best thing that ever happened to me because it really helped me get my stuff together. Most people out there, if you're not sure what you want to do, spending a little bit less money at junior college, and, especially a good one, it would get the ball rolling in the right direction, especially because when you're young, you're expected to make these decisions and what's your major and what you want to do for the rest of your life. It can be a little bit tough. I tried to do that didn't do so well right out of high school, had to go to a JC, play football at a JC, and that also helped. But, I look back at it and I'm just like, glad I did it. Moving on here. So as I got older, out of my 20s, one thing I wanted to talk about today, and the crux of what I wanted today to be about, was I am going through something right now that has been pretty devastating for myself, my friends, and my family. And there are some things that I'm starting to realize in life that you cannot experience without going through them. I had a relatively sheltered beginning of my life, as I said, and even when I went to college, I always knew I had the backing and the backup of my parents and my support system. And because of that, I just kind of lived life like I always knew it was going to fall in my favor. And I never took things that seriously. Fast forward into now in my life, I'm a father, a husband, someone who has responsibility, and that has really effectively changed my life. But we will talk about these in later podcasts as well. What I have realized is that what I'm currently going through right now, I was not taught how to get through some of these situations. And even if you're taught how to go through some of these situations, you really have a hard time of navigating them, honestly, without going through them. And so what do I mean by that? There's a verse that I have that sticks with me, and it's tattooed on me. It's one of my favorite verses. It's consider it all joy when you go through tribulations of many kinds, because the testing of your faith develops perseverance. It's hard to understand what perseverance is. It's really hard to understand what your back being against the wall is without going through something. And right now I'm going through something, and when you're first thinking about things, you think that, or when you're projecting or broadcasting or imagining your life, you think you're doing everything right. And you also think that things are just going to fall in your favor if you're just a good person, if you just do the right thing. And what I'm realizing is, even when you're doing the right thing, and even when you're being a good person, you can still miss something. In my 30s, when I finally started accepting responsibility, decided to become a man instead of dealing with things like a child and like a boy, I've started to realize you have to be intentional with your behaviors. You have to be intentional with your words. And even when you've been the most intentional you can be, you still have a propensity to, or you still have the ability to fall into, I don't want to say a trap, but into a tribulation or a trial. You can plan this thing all you want, which I pride myself on doing. I like to budget. I'm one of those people who like to plan ahead of time. I don't know if there's anyone else out there that likes to do the same thing. I consider myself a planner, and then I believe my plan is going to work. I have the confidence, I have the faith in myself and in my beliefs and in the Lord that things are going to work out. But how they work out is something that you just really cannot plan for. And I'm realizing that right now with this situation. So when I'm looking at what I'm currently going through and people who want to get a deeper dive, we can definitely entertain that through an email or a phone call later on. I won't go too far into the weeds here. However, I'm really realizing, and it hurt at first when I first experienced this, and it is something right now that what me and my family are going through is a life-shaking event. However, I just keep going back, what could I have done differently? And I can't find anything. And one thing that keeps coming up is, this is still preparation for my future. And I was talking to one of my mentors the other day. He said, good thing it's happening now. And I'm like, wait, what? Why is it a good thing that it's happening now? He's like, because right now it might cost you thousands, hundreds, maybe. He's like, in the future, it may cost you millions. And that thing just really set with me. And what it really meant beyond the money part of it to me was, there were some things in this life that maturity just takes care of. You just have to experience some things in this life. And the experience of this life helps you to prepare and become more wise about the things that are headed towards you later in life, because they will come. The ups and downs of life for any person, whether you're a holy person and you believe in God, you pay your taxes, you pay your tithes, you do everything right, you keep your bills down, you got perfect credit, you're still gonna go through something. I'm realizing is, no matter what you do, life does happen. In that moment, I was sad that it happened. But right now, as I sit here today, recording this podcast to you, I don't know if I ever would have recorded this had that thing not happened. I don't know if we would have moved forward with some of the things that we want to do as a family had I not gone through that thing. I don't know if I would have understood how good God has been in my life and how much I've affected the lives of other people had this thing not, because I'm one of those people, I like to downplay my abilities. I'm telling you right now, today, what those abilities are. However, I have not always been that way, and I still struggle to pat myself on the back and reap some rewards and be positive toward myself due to some other things in my life that make it really difficult to do that. And I will also disclose some of this stuff in later podcasts. However, again, keeping it very general, keeping it very generic, because I don't want to take too much of your time in this first one. Guys, sometimes we don't have the ability or the capability to do anything different. And so I always talk to, especially with some of my assistant managers or the people that I work very closely with outside of work, especially my young people, I'm always teaching them, like, you have to be careful the things you say to yourself, especially because when people say, I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I could have done this, I'm like, you did the best you could with what you have. And in this situation, I was beating myself up. I truly felt like a failure, and like I failed my family. I felt my like I was taken to my ancestors, failed myself. However, people go through stuff, and people do things, and people do make mistakes, because I am a human being just like you, just like anybody who may hear this or anybody who doesn't hear this. However, what you say to yourself is, Lord, thank you for the lesson. I hope that I've learned the lesson, and when I move forward, I pray that I don't make the same mistake. However, in my 20s, I never would have made this mistake. I never would have been exposed to something like this because I was unwilling to take the responsibility. And in my early 30s now, my mid 30s now, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, man, what could I have done differently? I didn't see any other way of doing it differently. But in my 40s or even a year, 5 months from now, I'm going to do it completely differently because I experienced the trial, the tribulation, and it is going to develop the perseverance that I need to be a better version of myself and continue to draw other people and teach them the lesson, and it just flows downhill. We don't always need to beat ourselves up for making mistakes. You know, that's one thing that I've realized in this one. And the second thing I've realized in this situation, when people show you their true colors, you believe them. My grandma used to say that. My mom used to say that. My grandpa, my pastor. When people show you their true colors, you have to believe them. Because, you know, me wishing that that person could change, me wishing that I could change, me wishing that something could have been different on the behalf of that person or another person involved in any situation, that's wishful thinking. And that's another lesson. That's another wise lesson. And you hear these funny sayings from old people when you're young. You're like, man, these old people don't know what they're talking about. People can change, you know. When people show you their colors, believe them. If they show you they're blue, they're blue. Okay? If they show you they're purple, they're purple. If you wishing that it was different ain't gonna change the fact that you looking at a purple unless you went colorblind, and then that's still you manipulating the situation. You know, like, these people are who they are. And so the lesson for today and the lesson for this time in my life, which has changed my life, again, I'm sitting here doing this podcast because now I'm feeling moved. Now I'm feeling prompted. Now I feel different. Now I have a different view of life because of what I'm going through. We just have to take time to understand that years and years and years, stacking the years, being self-reflective is going to bring about wisdom, right? And that's what we're all after. And I believe wisdom brings about, what do we talk about at the beginning of the podcast? Happiness, that contentment with self, that contentment with life. The tools to guide us through this life is that wisdom to get us through what we're going through. And I tell you right now, I really did need to go through what I went through and what I'm currently going through, you know, and I don't think I could have or would have done anything differently. And when I speak to other people, I don't even take my own medicine sometimes. I have to find a way. You have to find a way. We have to find a way to accept that we just don't know everything. And as we learn, it gives us an ability to move forward and move the lives of other people forward as well. So like I said, when people show you their true colors, believe them and understand that sometimes you just got to go through what you go through. Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you go through tribulations of many kind, because the testing of your faith develops perseverance. That perseverance is going to help run the race of this life. That perseverance is going to help you get that wisdom that's going to help you navigate this life. And when you get that wisdom, it's to give back in love to a community like we're trying to do here. Like I said, thank you guys so much for joining this podcast. Thank you so much for joining this video on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, I'm going to continue to see you. Like I said, I got about 13 episodes planned already. I really do hope that they come to fruition. And my prayer, my hope, my true plea is that we can gather a community of people together and we can all start to build together, because I believe I'm going to be a successful person and you guys are going to get to see this journey with me, and I'm going to get to see your journey as well. And so let's make this a fun community. Let's make sure we're talking back to each other. If I can get comments, if I can get emails, phone calls, or whatever, that would be great. So that if you guys have a question you want me to answer, if there's a certain podcast you want me to do, I definitely want to hear from you. Like I said, thank you guys so much. Subscribe to the channel, smash the like button. If you're listening to this on podcast, make sure you give a great review, and I'll see you next time.